know your power. Smart talk, real facts. This is your hour.
Good evening and welcome to Justice. I'm your host, Attorney at Law Janice St. Romain, and this is the show where we talk about knowing your rights and knowing your power. This evening, we have something very special planned for you. We're going to be talking about the Children, Care and Adoption Act. We'll be talking about the care and protection of children. We'll be unpacking what the law says under the Children, Care and Adoption Act of 2015, how adoption actually works in practice, who can adopt, what safeguards exist for children, and what you as families may need to know. For viewers who are at home, whether you're considering an adoption, whether you're caring for a child who may not be biologically yours, or if you simply want to understand the law, tonight's program is for you. And as always, if you have questions, join us in the Facebook comments. We'll be taking some in our rapid fire segment at the end of this episode. Now, to guide us through this important conversation, I'm joined by two very distinguished experts. We're joined with Ms. Fiona Charles Richards, Director of the Family and Social Services Division. She's joining us here in studio. She is a clinical psychologist and Director of the Family and Social Services Division in Antigua and Barbuda. She serves as chair of the National Adoption Committee, overseeing matters related to adoption and child protection within the national legal framework. She holds a Master of Science in Clinical Psychology from the University of the West Indies, Mona, and brings over 20 years of experience in child welfare and family services, including 14 years in education, working directly with children and families. Now, Mrs. Charles Richards is also the founder of The Growth Practice, where she provides psychological assessments and therapeutic support for children and families. Our second guest this evening is attorney at law, Sherry Ann Bradshaw, principal of S. Bradshaw and Associates. She holds a Bachelor of Laws from the University of Wolverhampton. She completed her bar vocational training at BPP Law School in London and obtained her legal education certificate from the Norman Manley Law School in Jamaica. Now, Ms. Bradshaw has over 20 years' experience in private practice in Antigua and Barbuda, with extensive work in family law, estate administration, property, and civil matters. She's handled a number of adoption cases before the court. Thank you for joining us tonight, both of you. Thank you, counsel.
Good evening.
And welcome to Justice.
Thank you.
Now, we're going to be starting at the very beginning. This evening, the primary legislation that is governing what we're discussing, the Child Care, Protection and Adoption in Antigua and Barbuda, is the Children, Care and Adoption Act of 2015. It would have replaced some older legislation, like parts of the old Adoption of Children Act, the Guardianship of Infants Act, and in 2015, when it came into place, these would have been repealed by that Children, Care and Adoption Act that we're discussing. It emphasizes the best interests of the child as paramount. This is actually outlined in Section 3, and that aligns with international standards like the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. So one could say that this act really establishes a modern legal framework to safeguard children in Antigua and Barbuda. It sets out the procedures for adoption, for care, and supervision orders, and for child protection interventions. One of the things that's mentioned in Section 5 of the Act is the fact that a partnership approach is promoted between the government, non-government agencies, families, corporations, business, agencies, and the community in taking responsibility for and dealing with children. Now, Mrs. Charles Richards, you work within the Ministry of Social Transformation as Director of Family and Social Services. Can you share a little bit about the various actors that are engaged under this act and what that sort of partnership approach to children and taking care and protection of those most vulnerable in society, what it looks like in practice? Who are some of the actors and how do they interrelate?
No, we won't get in trouble because in practice and what's in legislation are two separate different things.
Well, you can tell us how it goes in practice.
Right. So most of our stakeholders are, for example, our churches, our community-based organizations, or community. along with our nurses, doctors, teachers. So schools and the Ministry of Education is one of our primary stakeholders, and they're actually one of our first referral agencies when there are different things happening or noticed that are happening with a child. In addition to that, we do have some amazing persons within the communities that will actually say something, but the law holds some of those persons a little bit higher. So as it relates to a teacher, a nurse, a doctor, a counselor, they are called mandatory reporters, which include a pastor and the church members. So it holds a bit more of accountability in terms of who our stakeholders are and what they're seeking to address. There's actually a fine for not reporting. But, as I said, what actually happens doesn't, it doesn't always happen the way we want it to. But I'm hoping that 2026 is going to be the year when we see a lot more enforcement of that aspect in terms of protecting our children. Because in the last year, we've had approximately 183 children within our system.
Wow.
Okay, and for majority of those cases were sexual assault matters.
Wow, that's heartbreaking.
Right. So as a result of that, we are really asking the public that if you really see something and you're worried about something just feels a bit off, there's no harm in actually saying something. And so even for the parents who cover up, because we have a lot of that happening, where a mom or an aunt or a cousin may know that something happened to the individual, but because the person may be the financial supporter of the family, etc., a lot of things go quiet. So what we're hoping to have happen this year is a little bit more of enforcement in terms of holding those persons accountable. But as it is right now, and of course, how could I forget my social services people at hospital? They've been amazing as well. But it allows that in terms of the partnership. So the referral happens. In some instances, we also have what we call case conferencing. And case conferencing will also include a teacher, a counselor, or perhaps the entire team in terms of how we are going to address some of the issues that we've seen, especially in cases of neglect, whether children are showing up to school dirty or unkempt or have not been eaten breakfast, etc. And that happens a lot more than we realize. In terms of addressing that and seeing what type of additional support mechanisms the family may need. So our good friends over at Social Protection Board will support in terms of identifying whether this family needs vouchers or additional financial support.
Okay, and so that's sort of an ecosystem of support that you've described. It really requires coordination across the entire system, multiple stakeholders, and the role of civil society sounds very important. I know also we would have perhaps the police who would have to step in if there's any type of abuse, or perhaps we have the courts where they make certain types of orders for the care and protection of the children. So I guess then that leads us to another question. How exactly can the court system assist, or where does it step in? What is a care order? What can be done in terms of the protection of children who are in that vulnerable position? And I might maybe turn to Ms. Bradshaw. Maybe she can explain to us what a care order is, what it entails.
Well, a care order is exactly as it states. And when you mention children, I have to always start with the welfare of the child is paramount. And that is the principal basis that touches and concerns anything where children are concerned. So then we look at the care order. Exactly what it states, that's what it is. It's a care order looking out only for what is in the best interest of the child. So if it is that the court thinks, and that's all that the court needs to have, a thought, an application being made to the court, and the court thinks that this child may be in danger or may be in a vulnerable position, the care order can be effected on an application, and that application normally comes from the social services department, because they are the ones actually charged with the responsibility of approaching the courts to have a care order put in place for that child. And then the court can decide whether or not that child is going to be placed in the care of either a family member or in foster home, or even in one of the homes that are in Antigua for children, of which they're not many. Right. But most times there is a family member who is willing to take on the responsibility of, in the interim, caring for that child. And likewise, there are other persons in the foster system. They may be a bit overburdened, but there are persons who are available and would make themselves so available just to accommodate children in vulnerable situations. But that application normally comes from the social services department.
Right, and as you would have mentioned fostering, I'd like to bounce back to you, Mrs. Charles Richards. What does the setup of our current foster system look like? As you mentioned, it's a little bit overburdened. What is the process for somebody who wishes to foster? Is that something that is open to the public to participate in and to assist?
So we currently have approximately 56 foster parents within Antigua and Barbuda. About that. And most of the times, not everybody wants the adult children. Everybody wants a newborn or a 5-year-old or a 4-year-old or a 2-year-old, and sometimes that will have, of course, its challenges. But nonetheless, we have had some amazing persons come forward to say, hey, you know, it doesn't matter the age. And if, I would prefer them a little older so I don't have to deal with the sleepless nights or something to that extent. And these persons come from different ranges across our communities of Antigua and Barbuda. As Ms. Bradshaw would have said, some persons are family members, but in a lot of cases, recently in the last 5 years, we've had a lot of persons come forward to say, how can I assist? And that has created a significant change for us in that we would have also done some recruitment drives. We would have put out some announcements in terms of us seeking, you know, persons who are interested. And so as it is right now, we have about 15 persons in waiting as it relates to wanting to foster. Now, what does that process look like to foster? So clean criminal record.
Very important.
Very important. A bank statement, because we need to know that we're placing this child in a space
that is
that
safe.
is not just safe, but can also support the child, right? Then, of course, we'll ask for your medical report, because then you might say or think, I don't want to just know my business. It's not about knowing your business. Now, if you are a person who is at risk or has a potential disease or infection that results in you dying in a short period of time.
Right.
What does that mean
What
for the
becomes
interest
of
of
the
the child?
Right.
And so those are things that we will ask for. We'll ask for references. And of course, we will also conduct a home study report to ensure that what you have presented in your application to become a foster parent is reflective in reality. So some persons may say, I have a 2-bedroom house, but it's not really a 2-bedroom house, right? And so we would go into the homes to ensure that the space that is identified is one that offers support, safety, and of course privacy and protection for children, because we also do not want our children being exposed to a different plurality of our, you know, lifestyles, etc. And so we would do the home study report. So those are just some of the criteria that we look at in terms of, and of course we do an interview to determine your suitability.
Right.
Right.
So I think, thank you so much for that. I think that's a very good overview of what you might be looking for, and we would encourage persons who might be interested to reach out to the Family and Social Services Division. As we speak about fostering, I think we can then go a step further and let's talk a bit about adoption. So Ms. Bradshaw, for the viewers who are watching tonight, when we say that a child is adopted, what does that legally mean in Antigua and Barbuda under the law? What is adoption?
Well, under the law, when you say that you have adopted a child, adoption in essence means that you are the parent, albeit not the biological parent, but you are the parent of that child. And you are financially responsible in all regards and otherwise for the welfare of the child. You will notice throughout the program, I will be using the word welfare and paramountcy, because that is the only thing that the courts are concerned about where children relates, especially in adoption. What is the best interest of the child, and that welfare of the child is of paramount importance, nothing else. It trumps everything. Did I say trump? It trumps everything and all. The court is only concerned about the child and the best interest of the child. So you adopt a child, you are the child's mother, you are the child's father, you're responsible, legal and otherwise, for the child.
And unlike guardianship or fostering, this is a permanent situation.
It's a permanent situation. It's a permanent situation. So you can't have a parent of a child who has been adopted come in and say, oh, I have rights. You have no rights.
It's been extinguished.
It's been extinguished. It's been taken away. You have no rights. You have no say. You don't have the right to even come and ask me anything. You have no right. Your rights are no longer there as it relates to that particular child.
Right.
Of course. So it's a permanent situation.
So, before I ask you to walk us through the process, which I will, I'd like to bounce back to Mrs. Charles Richards to just talk about the adoption committee. So what is the role of the adoption committee? It's something that was created under the Act. What exactly is the role of the adoption committee, and who can seek to adopt?
Okay, so in a lot of cases, we have family members who would have said, you know, I would prefer that my sister takes responsibility for this child because I may have a health condition. Or we may have persons who may say, I want to offer my family member a better life. And I'm in a better position than my family members elsewhere to offer them to do so. We do overseas adoption, meaning that a home study report is done within the area of the person that is living. So we would have a licensed social worker within that state, etc., provide us with the same documentations that we were asking for, which is the home study report, the financial report, the criminal background, etc. And so those are things that we would look into. Now, as it relates to the role of the adoption committee, we examine all of what is in front of us. And at some points, we may go further by saying that we might want to speak to the family, depending on if there were some red flags that came up in the home study report, or there were some concerns voiced by committee members. Now, the committee members range from myself, the Director of Family and Social Services. We have a secretary to the board. We also have a representation from medical. We have a legal representation. We also have 2 specialists in terms of child development, along with persons who also come from different NGOs. So they sit as representation of the board in terms of ensuring that we are taking the welfare of the child into significant consideration, that whatever decision we make must result in the child being in a better living situation than what they're leaving. So in other words, anything that we do is going to ensure that the best interest of that child is considered. So sometimes we will put, you know, an adoption on hold because either something was missing, either there was no consent of the biological parents, and we'll be asking questions, where's the affidavit of consent? If the affidavit of consent is not there, is the attorney planning to dispense in terms of the consent of the biological parent? What was the situation? Is the child coming through foster care who already has, is a ward of the court? So we have cases where the child is also a ward of the court, meaning that there is no way that the biological parent will ever be able to take care or raise that child at all. Whether it be for different developmental challenges, mental health challenges, or in terms of their own state. When we say their own state, whether it be substance misuse, etc., they would place the child at significant risk if the child would remain with them. So in some instances, when the ward of the court is made, the court will make a recommendation within the order for the child to be adopted within a year.
Okay.
Right? Which means the process is going to be a little different because now there's no consent of a parent required. What we would have is the signature of what we call a next friend, or it will be dispensed completely since the court had already given a previous order.
All right. And so we're going to get a little bit more into the process with Ms. Bradshaw. But before we get there, what I want to ask is, how exactly does a child get placed for adoption? So what you would have mentioned in our Antiguan context, we have a lot of children who, as you mentioned, they may be living with family members, or they may be a situation where someone was already identified. But do we have children, as you mentioned, perhaps somebody is a ward of the state, they're in foster care. How would somebody who wishes to adopt be sort of paired with an eligible child? Is that something that takes place?
Okay, so as would have indicated earlier, some persons would come forward and saying when they do the application that I want a newborn. I would prefer that I'm getting a younger child. So somebody that, you know, we can culture, and of course there's still that cultural connotation that if we get a child before 5, then, you know, there's a little bit different structure as opposed to getting a child older. However, there are some persons who will say, I don't want that challenge. I would prefer an older child, a child who's 5 or 7 or 8. Now, there are times when we have children who are within some of our foster care homes who will not be eligible to go back to their living with their parents, their biological parents. Whether it be, as I said, through an order of the court, and they were made wards of the state, the process is a little different. So what would end up happening is that through those interviews that we would have conducted with the persons who have applied to become foster parents, it would allow for a criteria as to what type of child would be most suitable. So I don't think they'll have a problem me saying that we have 2 medical practitioners who are doctors who are also sisters. And we had 2 boys who at the time we did not realize would have had a challenge. Mom was significantly on substances, and one ended up having facial paralysis. We wanted to keep the children together because they're biological brothers, and we also wanted them to grow up in a space where they could be developmentally supported.
Right.
So had they not been paired with medical practitioners, there would have been a lot different challenges that could have occurred that persons may not have observed because that was not their specialty.
So there's a lot of consideration for the child's welfare
Yes.
that the adoption committee takes into consideration. Yes. And so now, Ms. Bradshaw, you as the legal mind here, can you assist us, walk us through the process of someone who wants to complete an adoption? What is the legal process that would take place?
The first thing that actually happens is that an application for adoption is completed. There is a form that has been provided by the adoption committee. That form is completed, and the form would ask for information such as Mrs. Fiona would have gone through some of it, your medical report, perhaps a bank statement, a police report, from here or anywhere else you may have resided, as well as references, and at least 2 references. You complete the form with the supporting documents, including, if it's a married couple, the marriage certificate, the birth certificate of the child. If there is a signed guardianship between the intended applicants and the parent or parents of the child, that is submitted as well. You provide that information to the adoption committee. The adoption committee then looks at it. They then have to do a home study. So they would visit the home, they would visit the schools, and any institution that the child may be involved with. They would even go to the community and make the necessary inquiries because, as I said, the welfare of the child is paramount. They will also do a home study at the intended applicant's home because the adoption committee needs to ensure that if we are even considering
the environment has
to be safe and conducive to that of a child. And every child is different. So every child comes with different facts and different issues. So that is the task that is assigned to the welfare department. And I can only imagine that it is an onerous and a burdensome task because you have to ensure that you get it right. Because if you don't get it right, you're talking about a child. And what happens in a child's life negative or positive, can affect them throughout, right into their teenage and their adult lifestyle. So once the home study is provided from the Social Services Department, an application for adoption is officially and formally made at the High Court, and you would have to seek the services of an attorney to do that. The application asks for the same information, your name, your address, your place of employment, along with the supporting documents, the home study. What is important to state is that you must have to be at least 25 years of age to adopt. So you can't be 18 and say, I want to adopt this child. You have to be at least 25 years old. And you cannot be less than 21 years older than the child you are adopting. You may ask yourself, why is there that restriction? We go right back again. The welfare of the child is paramount. You can't have an 18-year-old adopting a child. That 18-year-old may not be suited to deal with a child.
Right.
Because you're 18, you might be an adult, but you're basically still a child and still learning and developing. So once the application is submitted, the court gives you a hearing date, and on that hearing date, the parties attend the court along with the parents, because you would have to serve the parents with the application. There are instances where parents consent.
Meaning the biological parents.
The biological parents.
Right.
There are instances where the parents consent, because when I say parent, remember the adoption is not complete.
Right.
So you're not the parent, you are the applicant. So the consent would normally be obtained from the parents, the biological parents. If the consent is not obtained, an application can be made to the court to dispense with the consent. And when you say dispense with, you ask, what does that mean? Do away. I don't need your consent. But you have to support that application with affidavit evidence.
I was just about to ask, what are the circumstances in which the court might dispense?
I was going to go into that. So the circumstances wherein which the court would dispense would be if the parent doesn't have a relationship with the child.
Okay.
If the parent doesn't have a relationship with the child and that parent is refusing to give consent, it means that that parent is unreasonably withholding consent and is just trying to make the process much more difficult than it is, especially considering that you would have had a home study which
Right.
would have recommended to the court that this child is fit and suitable to be adopted by these or this applicant.
And that is in the best interest and
And
welfare.
that is in the best interest of the child. So parents who have children, don't think that your consent can't be dispensed with, because, as I said, the court doesn't care what your feelings are as it relates to the matter. The only concern is it in the child's best interest for this adoption to be granted? And applicants, not because you make an application for an adoption, it doesn't mean that the court will grant your application, because there is where the police, the watchdogs, come into play, the welfare department. So the welfare department has to ensure and keep everything at the front of their mind, the welfare, the paramountcy, the welfare principle, the best interest of the child. There are instances where when the application for adoption has come to the court and the judge may say, I want a child advocate appointed for this child, notwithstanding the home study being submitted and favorable. Or the court may say, I want a guardian ad litem appointed for this child, because that child advocate and that guardian ad litem becomes the voice of the child. When children are 11 and above, you must seek their consent as well.
So I was just about to ask, I know that the Act speaks to actually hearing from the children themselves.
Yes.
I know the adoption committee might actually interview the kids. Sometimes that might happen in court as well.
Well, no, not in court.
Okay.
Once you're 11 and over and you're being in an adoption proceedings, the court wants the child's consent.
Right.
If you're 5 and above, the court wants to know that the child has been spoken to and is aware of
That they
what
understand what's
this
happening.
adoption actually means. So not because they're children don't mean that they don't have a voice. They have a voice and they have a right to know and they have a right to understand what this means.
And they have a say.
And
in
they
the
have a
adoption.
say because it's their life.
Exactly.
And when you interview children, you can actually get a taste of what is actually happening in the home. And you can then make a self-determination. I think I may just want to adjourn this application for a little while, and I will appoint a child advocate, I will appoint a guardian ad litem, and I will await the child advocates and or the guardian ad litem's report, because what we're thinking of, the welfare, the best interest of the child, because adoption is permanent.
Yeah. And it extinguishes the original parents' rights, as you said. So that's
Absolutely.
not something that you want to play with. I think what's a good thing is that the Act itself points out that there's no sort of right to adoption of a child. It's a service, and it really is about the best interest of the
Yes.
child. So thank you for that. I think that's a very clear overview of the process, and very useful for those at home who may be considering adoption. So far tonight, we've been looking at what adoption legally means here in Antigua and Barbuda, who may adopt under the law, the structured process that ensues, and ensuring that children are placed safely and in their best interests. We're going to take a very short break now, but stay with us, because when we return, we're going to continue to discuss the protections built into the law for children, and then we have our rapid fire round to close things out. Thank you, and this is Justice.
Justice. Justice.
Justice. Know your rights and know your power. Thursdays at 8 p.m. only on ABS.
Reporting live from Caribbean Union Bank's press conference, where bank representatives will address its customers and the media, explaining just how CUB simplifies life through its financing.
Today, my team and I will share with you how CUB's financial solutions are designed to simplify your life. Now, let's open the floor for any questions that you may have.
How can you help me as a retirement?
That's a good question. We offer customized retirement solutions at competitive rates.
How easy is it for me to switch my mortgage to CUB?
With attractive interest rates and minimal switching fees, CUB makes switching mortgages easy.
Do you offer point-of-sale machines?
Absolutely. All point-of-sale systems can speed up checkout and boost sales.
Those were great questions, and our team is here to further support you. We're Caribbean Union Bank, the bank that cares, and our doors are open to welcome you.
Get unbeatable value you'll love. Find it only at Courts. We've got the best range in appliances, electronics, furniture, and so much more with the best quality and the best prices. Get a free gift with purchase on select items. Save 20% on select bases when you purchase the matching mattress. Take advantage of great deals and huge savings. Treat yourself. Keep your cash with Courts Ready Finance. Unbeatable value only at Courts. Bringing value home. Conditions apply. Offer ends February 28, 2020.
Justice.
Justice. Know your rights and know your power. Thursdays at 8 p.m. only on ABS.
Justice.
Welcome back to Justice, where we're all about knowing your rights and knowing your power. Tonight, we're discussing adoption and child protection under the Children Care and Adoption Act of 2015. We're joined in studio with Mrs. Fiona Charles-Richards, Director of the Family and Social Services Division, and we're also joined by Attorney at Law, Sherry-Ann Bradshaw. Now, we've been speaking a lot about the Act and how it makes it quite clear that there are a number of principles to be applied in relation to adoption. A number of these are outlined at Section 83. As we've briefly mentioned, or quite frequently mentioned, at the top of that list is consideration of the best interest of the child, both in childhood and also later in life. There's also the fact that the Act is clear that adoption is to be regarded as a service for the child, not for persons who are wishing to acquire and care for the child. So it expressly states that a person does not have the right to adopt a child. It is the best interest and welfare of the child that is paramount. As we've also mentioned before the break, if a child is able to form his or her own views on adoption, their views are taken into account and they are given weight based on how they feel about the process of the adoption. Now, we want to talk a bit about the given name of the child after the adoption process is complete. Is that something that the new parents can seek to change, or is that something that persons tend to keep the same? What is the process after the adoption has been completed with regard to the child's name?
There's actually a part in the application where it asks what it is that you want the child to be called. In terms of the surname of the child, you would have to state the child's surname is to be, if it is you want the child to have your surname, which is what most applicants would want. But in terms of changing the other names for the child, now, if you want to change the other names, meaning the first name and the middle name, you're going to have to indicate to the court why you want to do that. And you may ask yourself, I want to name the child whatever I want to name the child. No, but then you have to take, once again, the welfare of the child. Is the change of a child's name going to cause the child any unnecessary stress?
Identity crisis.
Exactly. So those are the things that the court take into account. The court will readily allow you to change the surname because you want it to be synonymous. But in terms of the first and the middle name, the court may, once you give a good reason, the court...
They will consider it.
Will consider. But they will look at, is this best for the child? Because you would have had a child being called Isaiah for 7 years, and you're going to want to call him Patrick. There's going to be a crisis. There's going to be an adjustment issue. There are going to be issues as it relates to school and other activities that that child may be involved with. One thing that I didn't mention, which is important, is after an adoption is granted, the birth certificate for the child is sealed off. So that child or the parent, the adopted parents or anybody will never ever be able to go to the civil registry to extract that birth certificate because it is sealed off. What is given is an adoption certificate, which is noted in the adoption registry. So you have a register for births, a register for deaths, a register for marriages, and you also have an adoption register. So in the adoption register, you have the name of the child. What never changes is his date of birth, his or her date of birth. You have the name of the child, the parents, the adopted parents, when the adoption order was granted. So you will never ever, that child can never ever go and extract his or her birth certificate. It is sealed off by the court by virtue of the adoption being granted, an adoption order being issued and sent down to the civil registry to update the records as to what the present day situation is.
I think something that is very interesting to many persons at home who may be viewing, we were probably receiving a number of questions. Are inter-country adoptions possible? So, Mrs. Charles Richards, actually both of you can probably address that one.
Yeah, I'll take that first.
The persons who are watching at home.
Yes, inter-countries adoptions are possible. As a matter of fact, that was one of the enactments that came into the new act that was very absent in the old Adoption Act, because if you were not in Antigua residing here, you were not allowed to adopt a child if you were not living permanently residing in Antigua. So the legislation now allows for intercontinental adoptions. So intercontinental from the States, from England, from Canada, anywhere in the world. It's the same process. The application is completed, submitted, but the difference is that in terms of the home study, you would have to seek the services of an adoption agency. This is where the applicants who reside overseas are. You have to seek the services of an adoption agency, and the adoption agency will liaise with the welfare department, and the adoption agency in the States, I'm going to use the States as an example, would have conduct of doing the interviews with the applicants overseas, looking out for what is in the best interest of the child. Because you do have applicants who reside overseas and the child is in Antigua. And you may find that odd, but it's really not, because the child would not have had a visa in terms of the States to travel to be with the intended applicants. But there is a hiccup where the American system is concerned, because although you may not have an issue in getting the adoption order granted in Antigua, when it comes to getting a visa for the child to travel to the States, there is where it becomes technical. Why is it technical? Reason being, the immigration laws in the States, for obvious reasons, would only allow a child to obtain a visa who has been adopted if that child's parents were either indigent at the time of the adoption application, or if that child was a ward of the state, or if the child is an orphan. If you do not satisfy any of those three, the likelihood of that child getting a visa to travel to the States becomes difficult.
Quite low.
Right, so it then defeats the purpose of you making an application for adoption here in Antigua. So persons who live in the States in particular, they have to be minded of the fact that they may come across that spoke in the wheel. So that is why it's best for them to approach an adoption agency in their respective boroughs to find out, if I adopt this child, I get my adoption order in Antigua, will I be able to obtain a visa for the child to travel to the States? So that is the first thing I always tell my overseas clients, specifically from the States. Seek the services of an adoption agency, tell the adoption agency what your intentions are, and if you also have to seek the services of an attorney, a family attorney in your borough, do so, because you want to ensure once your application is granted, you can make the application and your child can be permanently resident with you. Places like Canada and the UK, we don't have that issue. They honor the adoption order no matter what. But America is the one that has those restrictions, and when you would have heard me say, for obvious reasons. And the obvious reasons, there are many times that parents would have put their child up for adoption by their sibling, by their brother, their sister, cousin, for benefits, so that the child can be put into the system and perhaps get a reduced rate in terms of education and things like that. And the states kind of caught up on it, and I guess they became very weary of it. So they've put restrictions. If you're indigent, orphan, or a ward, naturally, they will not give any issues. In terms of the indigence, you have to prove. So you have to be dirt poor. Orphan is very simple, death certificates of the parents. Ward of the court is an order that is obtained stating you are a ward of the court.
Thank you for that, Ms. Bradshaw. I think that was very enlightening. For those of you who are watching us online, comment on the Facebook stream if you found that to be very enlightening and if you thought that was very helpful. I think that our discussions so far have really given viewers a clear picture of how adoption works under the Children Care and Adoption Act. We're going to be switching gears for this last segment, and we're going to be going into what we call our rapid fire round. The rapid, don't be scared, ladies. You guys can handle it. So this is the
we do rapid fire every day.
Exactly. So I'm going to give them some real world scenarios, and some of them are asked by our viewers ahead of time, and some have been perhaps mentioned on tonight's Facebook stream. After the rapid fire round, we're also going to read some Facebook comments and get reactions. So get to commenting, guys. Remember that nothing discussed during this show and the rapid fire round can constitute or replace legal advice. As Ms. Bradshaw said, always seek the advice of a lawyer, or you can contact the Directorate of Social Services for any personal situations. But I am going to be presenting some scenarios, and they are going to be reacting and giving us their answers. So Ms. Bradshaw, this first one is for you. Sure. Scenario 1. There's a 12-year-old child with one biological parent who has passed away, and the other biological parent has disappeared. They have had no contact for years. Can an adoption of that child by a suitable couple proceed even in those circumstances?
Most definitely. The application to dispense with the production of the consent of the absent parent.
And that would be a valid enough reason for the court?
Yes, because more than likely the child would have been living with someone who is not his or her parent, and that would be recited in an affidavit in support of the application to dispense. So most certainly that would be an appropriate application to be made, and the couple would not be barred from adopting the child.
Wonderful. So scenario 2, Mrs. Charles Richards, you are up. So there's been an application for adoption to the adoption committee. The child, who's 14 years old, says they do not want to be adopted by the prospective family. They have indicated this to the welfare division. How does that impact the proceedings, if at all? What happens in a situation like that? The child says no.
The child says no. And so that has to be considered, because at 14, he or she is able to indicate what they think would be in their best interest. There are sometimes, I think we've had a case similar to that, where the child did not even know that they were supposed to be adopted. And what would have happened is that we would have halted the proceedings in terms of ensuring that the appropriate questions were asked to the child. So those, in some cases like that, we will ask to speak with the child from the perspective of the adoption committee. And based on what that conversation produced, will determine whether we proceed forward, if the child wasn't sure, if there was something we needed to clarify. But if the child is insistent that he or she does not want to be adopted, then we will be telling the attorney, we're so sorry, but we cannot approve this application and we would list out our varying reasons and recommendations.
I'm happy to hear that the child is taken into consideration, and as we mentioned before, their welfare is paramount. So we're moving on to the third rapid fire scenario. What happens if a biological parent initially consents to the adoption of their child by a prospective family, but then they change their mind during the process? They change their mind. What happens then?
That happens all the time. I've actually had 3 situations where that happens. Now, what would happen in a situation like that? You would still go ahead in making the application to the court for adoption. You would serve the parent, and that parent would have to come to court to indicate why he or she is no longer consenting to the adoption. And the reason has to be a very good reason. Reason being, you would have initially given your consent, because the consent that is actually pursuant to the statute is detailed. It is not just a 5-line, I hereby consent. It is as detailed to state that I understand that my rights, my obligations, my responsibilities extinguished. It is detailed. It's like a 3-page document, and that is explained, and it's sworn to, and it's witnessed by a notary public or commissioner of oath. So that parent will then have to come to the court and indicate to the court why you no longer consenting. And if the reasons are not good reasons, the court will proceed to deal with the application to dispense with the consent, because you would have known at that time the objections. So you would have gone ahead and preempted and file the application to dispense with. If the court says, okay, then I think there may be something here that we may need to look at, the court will adjourn the matter and more than likely indicate to the parent, please go and seek legal advice, because their reason for not consenting may be a selfish reason. Because you have many situations where there are young ladies who have 5 children and only the baby is living with them, and the 4th child has been living with a foster parent since the child was 1, the child is 7, you've never had any contact, and you will come to court and say, oh, I changed my mind. You have not seen the child for 6 years. The child doesn't know you. So what is in the best interest of the child? The child's welfare is paramount.
That is really our motto this evening. The child's welfare is paramount. Yeah. Now, to everyone watching at home, this is bringing us closer to the end of our program. This is Justice. Now, we're going to do what we normally do right before the end, which is react to some of the comments that you may have been making on Facebook. So at this time, we're going to see if any of you have been making any comments. And in the meanwhile, I'm going to ask the ladies to give me any closing remarks that they may have before we get back to any comments from the Facebook. We'll start with you, Mrs. Charles Richards. Do you have any closing comments to the viewers at home?
I think one of the most rewarding part of being a director is bringing families together. And I cannot express, I think in the last 4 cases that we've had so many teary eyes in rooms, even the judges got a bit emotional. And just to recognize, even, and in some of the cases, their biological parents understood that, look, we're not in any position to care for this child. Let's find somewhere else for this child. And so in some instances, you find the family is become an extended family. In some instances, they keep in contact. So it has been extremely rewarding to see a family come together, a family who has wanted to give to a child, a family who has wanted, to support somebody else become a family. And so that has been one of the most rewarding parts of this journey. And I do encourage persons to apply to become foster parents, because as much as there are challenges, there are many rewards to seeing another little human being become an amazing individual that impacts this country. And so, take the shot, shoot the shot. And once you know that you're in a suitable setting and you're financially stable, etc., then apply.
I think that's a wonderful message. And Mrs. Bradshaw, yes, any closing remarks from you?
Yes, I'm going to end with how I started. Adoption is a very, very serious process, and the welfare of the child is paramount above all anyone else or anything else in the room. So when you make that choice to be an adopted parent, you make that choice in the sense that you are financially responsible, obligated where that child is concerned, and that you are to ensure that the welfare of the child is in your best interest.
Wonderful remarks from Ms. Bradshaw. Now we have 3 Facebook comments that we're going to take and do some reactions to in studio. Let's see what's up. We have Sharika Jackson. Thank you, Ms. Jackson, for your comment. She asks, what if the adopted person wants solid evidence of who the biological parents are, especially if that information was never disclosed to them? I think that this question is going to what you mentioned in terms of the birth certificate. So she's asking, what if the child wants evidence of who their biological parents are? In Antigua and Barbuda, is that something that is withheld from them?
They can ask their adopted parents. They can ask their adopted parents. Or they can simply do a search at the court and they will see, because the birth certificates are submitted with the application, but ask your parent.
Okay, so that is information that is available to them. We have another commenter. Jemima Caleb, thank you, Jemima Caleb, for your comment. At what point, if possible, can the files or birth certificate be unsealed?
The birth certificates are not unsealed because the adoption is final.
Right, and so this goes to the point that was made where when an adoption takes place, it is final. That is now the new parent or parents. And we have a third comment from Facebook from Alicia Aska. Thank you, Alicia. Knowing that there are issues concerning human trafficking of children, is this considered for overseas adoption? A very good question by Council Aska.
Yes, and that is why that is where the adoption agency in the borough or the state where that individual is residing comes into play. They are the eyes, ears for the social services department in Antigua because we don't know what is going on. And I must say, overseas adoptions, you do not get a final order on the initial hearing of the application. You get an interim order for 6 months, and within that 6 months, you must submit either monthly or quarterly reports to the court, and you come back to the court looks at the reports, and then the court decides whether or not they will make the adoption final. That is only as it relates to overseas adoptions. The court, however, at the request of an adopted parent, can dispense with the 6 months, but the standard order given is overseas adoptions. The application comes up for hearing, you will get an interim order. You must provide monthly reports, and it is not you, it is the adoption agency who is applying.
And monitor.
They will pop in and do their checks, send the reports to the court, and based upon the report submitted to the court, when you come back after that 6 months, the court will determine whether or not they're going to finalize the adoption.
And with that, thank you so much for your comments on Facebook. Thank you for engaging with us. We have another question from David Franco. Thank you, David, for that question. Does adoption fraud or illegal adoptions happen in Antigua? That's an interesting one. We'll hear from the director on that one.
Absolutely not. And the reason, unless somebody is going to go and find some way that is completely foreign to anything that we've discussed tonight, we go through legal channels.
So we
do not give any orders for adoption unless that comes from a judge or a justice.
And so I think one thing we should probably point out is, you know, we mentioned adoption agencies, but there's one adoption committee here in Antigua and Barbuda, and so there's one entity that you initially are engaging with. So
and it has to be, and you have to get the order from the court.
And the court has to.
So the adoption committee doesn't say yes. The adoption committee gives a recommendation, and the court does not have to follow the recommendation of the adoption committee.
Very important. So thank you for those questions. We're happy that you are interested and engaging with us. And with that, we are at the end of our broadcast, but we can't wait to welcome you back next week for another episode of Justice. We want to thank both Mrs. Charles Richards and Ms. Bradshaw for joining us here this evening. If you enjoyed tonight's episode and you want more of this, please comment the next legal topic that you want to hear about on this stream, or email your questions and suggestions to ABS. Be sure to check the ABS Facebook page for next week's topic, and have a pleasant good evening. This is Justice. Know your rights, know your power. Thank you for joining us. Good night.
Know your rights, know your powers. Smart talk, real facts. This is your hour. We make it clear, we keep the blame. Virginia said, Roman, we break the law, down no game. Know your rights, know your power. Justice, know your rights, know your powers. Smart talk, justice, know your rights. This is your hour. Justice, justice, know your rights, know your powers. Smart talk. This is your hour.